I learned what hunger meant before I learned what love felt like. Not the kind of hunger that comes and goes, easily satisfied with a snack or a meal, but the kind that gnaws at your bones and curls in your stomach, making your body ache in ways words can barely describe. Hunger that grows louder each night as you watch the people who are supposed to love you feast while you scrape by. Every evening I would sit at the edge of the dining table, my plate almost always empty as my sister, Alina, ate like a princess. Her plate overflowed with food, steaming rice, tender cuts of meat, fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter glistening like sunlight on it. And there I was, clinging to scraps or sometimes nothing at all. Be grateful. My mother would snap if my eyes lingered too long on Alina's plate. You don't need as much as her. My father would add without even glancing in my direction. Their voices were sharp, but they weren't what hurt the most. It was the silence that followed the absence of comfort, of explanation, of love. Alina never seemed to notice my hunger. Or maybe she did and simply didn't care. She laughed loudly, demanded more when she wanted it, and pushed away what she didn't like, all while our mother hurried to replace it immediately. Anything for my princess, my mother would coo, as if she were placing a crown on Alina's head instead of serving dinner. Princess, that word echoed in my mind every night as I lay awake, stomach clenched, staring at the ceiling. I wondered what that made me. Not a princess, not even a servant, just nothing. Invisible, at school, the hunger followed me. It settled in my belly during lessons, clouding my thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate. Teachers called me lazy or distracted. Classmates whispered behind my back, calling me weird, strange, or fragile. I learned to hide my stomach, to smile when someone asked if I was hungry, and to laugh when they joked about how small I was. But laughter didn't fill me, silence didn't fill me, only emptiness did, gnawing and persistent. Even then, the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the way my parents treated Alina and me differently, the way they celebrated her small successes and ignored mine, the way they smiled at her, but never at me. Every glance, every word, every act felt like a reminder that I didn't belong, or at least that I wasn't as deserving. I remember one winter evening, the snow thick on the ground, when Alina received a new winter coat, lined and soft, bright blue, the kind that children dream about. I shivered in the old, thin jacket my parents had given me months ago, full of holes at the elbows, threadbare and faded. I didn't complain. Complaining never helped, but inside a storm was building. A mix of sorrow, resentment, and confusion that I couldn't yet name. I didn't understand why this was happening to me, why she was treated like royalty and I was unworthy of even basic care. I tried to ask once, softly, in the safety of my room, "Mom, why do I always get so little?" My mother's eyes hardened, and she shook her head. "Stop asking questions. Be grateful for what you have." I learned quickly not to ask again. Questions brought nothing but cold answers. I learned to hide my pain, to pretend I was fine, to watch quietly as Alina laughed and ate and lived. I learned to vanish into the shadows of our home, so quiet that my parents could pretend I wasn't even there. Yet, even in all this silence and neglect, there was a tiny flicker inside me, a stubborn, quiet voice that refused to disappear. It whispered in moments of solitude, "There is something wrong. There is more to this than what you see. You are not meant to be invisible." And though I didn't know it yet, that voice would grow louder with time, leading me to uncover a truth that would shake the foundation of everything I had ever known, and eventually give me the power to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. For now, though, I was just a child, hungry in a house that seemed to have no place for me, watching my sister eat like a princess while I went to bed wishing I could disappear. Alina's laughter was the soundtrack of my childhood. It echoed through the hallways, bounced off the walls, and filled every corner of the house while I stayed quiet, almost invisible. The contrast between us was impossible to ignore. Where she was bright and adored, I was dim and overlooked. Where she was praised for small achievements, I was ignored for even trying. And the more I watched, the more I felt the weight of a life that seemed never meant for me. School holidays, birthdays, holidays, every event followed the same script. My parents showered Alina with gifts and attention, while I received the bare minimum, if anything at all. Even on my birthday, the day that should have been mine, she got more presents than I did, more candles on her cake, and the spotlight of admiration. I learned quickly to smile, to say thank you, even when my hands itched with resentment, even when my heart was hollow. I remember vividly the day I realized the depth of the unfairness. It was a summer afternoon. The sun was bright, the sky impossibly blue, and our backyard smelled of freshly cut grass. My parents had set up a picnic for Alina's friends, plates of sandwiches, juice boxes, a chocolate cake stacked high. She ran around, laughing, while I sat on the porch steps, watching. I picked at a small piece of bread that had been left behind, crumbs falling from my fingers, my stomach twisting with the ache I'd grown to know too well. "Why don't you go play with her?" my mother asked, not even looking at me. Her tone wasn't harsh, just indifferent. I wanted to say something, to protest that I didn't belong in their world, but the words died in my throat. I nodded and stayed seated. Alina, of course, never noticed me, or perhaps she did and chose not to. She was too busy being adored. My parents were too busy fawning over her every smile, every laugh, every tiny achievement. The unfairness of it cut deep, sharper than hunger ever could. Sometimes, when I was alone in my room, I tried to imagine what it would be like to be treated like her, to be celebrated, cherished, given everything I wanted without asking. But those moments were fleeting. Reality would always creep back in, cold and unrelenting. I was never hers to love. I was never meant to be seen. I began keeping a quiet record in my mind, every moment of neglect, every meal I didn't get, every laugh that wasn't mine to share. Each memory piled up like bricks around my chest, building walls I didn't know I'd need. I didn't let anyone see my anger, though. Anger was dangerous. It was a thing my parents didn't want, and I had learned that survival meant hiding it. By the time I reached adolescence, I had become skilled at invisibility. I was quiet in class, blending into the walls at school, keeping my desires and frustrations tucked inside. I studied hard not because they encouraged me, but because I needed to prove something, even if it was just to myself. Every grade I earned, every success I achieved, was invisible, unnoticed, like I was shouting into an empty room. And yet, despite all of this, a quiet determination began to stir within me. Watching Alina eat, laugh, and be adored while I went hungry and unseen planted a seed in me. A seed that whispered, even if I didn't know it consciously, "This isn't fair." And someday, you'll find out why. It wasn't just jealousy, though that was certainly there. It was a strange sense of knowing. A feeling that the world I had been living in the cold house, the neglect, the invisible life, was somehow not meant to be mine. There was a disconnect I couldn't yet explain, a part of me that felt like I was living in someone else's story, that my existence in this home was a mistake. I began noticing small things, how my features didn't quite match my parents', how I never looked like them in photographs, how even the way I moved felt different from my sister. At first, I dismissed it, thinking maybe I was imagining things, but the thought refused to leave. It whispered to me in the quiet moments, in the ache of my stomach, in the hollow feeling in my chest, "You don't belong here." That realization was terrifying, but also liberating. For the first time, I sensed a reason behind the suffering, a truth lurking beneath the cruelty and neglect. And though I didn't yet understand what it was, the thought planted itself firmly in my mind, waiting for the moment when it would bloom into clarity. And so, I waited silently, invisibly, hungry but watchful, as the golden child of the house thrived in the warmth I was never allowed. I began to understand that the world had given me a role, but it wasn't a permanent one. I just had to discover the truth before it was too late. It started as a whisper, barely noticeable at first. A quiet thought I tried to push away. Why am I so different? Alina's hair curled like golden waves, mine fell straight, a dark shade that didn't match anyone in our family. My eyes were lighter than my parents' deep brown, and my skin tone, though not dramatically different, was enough to make me feel out of place when compared to Alina's warm, flawless complexion. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was normal to have subtle differences. Families didn't always look alike, did they? But the thought refused to leave. I began to notice patterns, things I hadn't dared to notice as a child. I was always overlooked. I never inherited anything from them. Every achievement, every emotion, every moment I hoped for recognition was ignored. And the more I looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. One afternoon, when I was 17, the whispers became a voice. My biology teacher, Mrs. Patel, had assigned a project on genetics. Family traits, inheritance patterns. DNA show how your family is connected, she said cheerfully. I hesitated. Sitting at my desk, I realized I had no clear answers. Not really, not about me. My features didn't match. My traits didn't align. I wanted to ask, but I feared her response, or worse, my parents' reaction if they ever found out. Then, in the quiet of my room that evening, I made a decision. If I wanted answers, I would find them myself. I saved every dollar I could from tutoring a neighbor's child, hiding it in an old shoebox under my bed. Weeks passed. Every coin, every note brought me closer. Eventually, I bought a DNA test kit online, small and discreet, a packet of possibility that promised answers I had longed for but never dared to seek. I was nervous as I swabbed my cheek, my hand trembling. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival, emotional survival, the survival of my identity. I sealed the sample and mailed it off, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. When the results arrived, I didn't open them immediately. I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the envelope, my stomach twisting not from hunger this time, but anticipation. Finally, I tore it open. The words stared back at me like a slap in the face. 0% match, not my mother, not my father, not even distant relatives. I read it again, certain I had misread, but the numbers didn't change. They were impossible, yet undeniable. I wasn't their child. I sank to the floor, my chest tight, my hands shaking. Everything I thought I knew, the hunger, the coldness, the neglect, the favoritism toward Alina suddenly made sense. I wasn't unloved because I was unworthy. I was unloved because I never belonged there. Memories came rushing back, unbidden. The plate of scraps I always received, the thin jacket I wore while Alina got warmth and comfort, the laughter that wasn't meant for me, the silence that greeted me when I dared to hope. It wasn't random. It wasn't neglect alone. It was a mistake, or something deliberate written in the very blood I now realized I didn't share with them. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me, sharper than any anger or sadness. The truth was a weapon, and I was finally armed. I began digging, quietly, slowly, old hospital records, newspaper clippings, online forums about infant Mick, SUPs, birth registries, anything that could explain the impossible. It was like chasing shadows, but every lead pulled me closer. Finally, I found it, a small clinic years ago, where 2 babies had been born on the same day, almost the same hour. Records had been partially destroyed in a fire, but not everything. There were gaps, ambiguities, but enough to suggest that a switch had occurred. My existence in my parents' home, living in hunger while my sister thrived, wasn't random. I sank back in my chair, staring at the documents. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. For years, I had suffered in silence, never knowing why. Now I knew, and that knowledge gave me something I had never felt before: control. I was no longer a passive observer of my own life. I was the author of the next chapter, and I would write it carefully, deliberately, because the truth was more than revelation. It was the beginning of justice, and someday, I told myself, they would all pay, not with violence, but with the awareness that they had tried to erase me, and I had survived. I would reclaim everything they had denied me: love, dignity, and the life that was rightfully mine. I didn't rush into them. I didn't storm the house screaming, demanding explanations. That wasn't my style, not anymore. Years of invisibility had taught me patience. They had underestimated me for far too long. Now, I would let time and truth do the work for me. First, I reached out quietly to the family whose child I truly was. They were shocked at first, confused, overwhelmed, but unlike my parents, they wanted to know me. They wanted to embrace me. They wanted to fill in the gaps of the childhood I had been denied. That alone was a form of revenge I hadn't expected. The knowledge that somewhere love awaited me naturally, without condition, without neglect. Weeks later, everything came to light. Lawyers, records, and testimonies slowly unraveled the lies that had sustained my old life. The clinic's mistakes or negligence were exposed. My real family wanted me. The world, it seemed, finally recognized the truth. And then came the confrontation. I walked into the home that had been my prison, my stomach no longer tied in knots from hunger, but from anticipation. My mother was in the kitchen, her hands trembling over the sink, her face pale and drawn. My father sat stiffly in the living room, eyes darting around as if searching for a hidden threat. And Elena's my sister. My shadow in another life, she froze, her laughter gone, replaced by something I had never seen before, fear. You knew, I said quietly, silence. You knew I wasn't yours. I said again, more firmly this time. My voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. My mother's hands shook as she brought them to her face. We suspected, she whispered. We just didn't know how to starve me properly. I interrupted, my voice cold but steady. Every word landed with the weight of years of neglect, of hunger, of invisibility. You didn't love me because you weren't supposed to. You only loved her. My father looked away. Elena's lips trembled. The golden princess of my childhood had no words, no defenses, no royal armor left. You treated me like a shadow. I continued. Invisible, starved, unworthy, and all along, I was living a life that was never mine. And yet, here I am, still standing, still whole, still human, and you— I let the words linger. You will never understand how that feels. My mother broke first. She sank to the floor, sobbing. My father remained silent, frozen. Elena's eyes were wide with disbelief, as if the very foundation of her life had crumbled. I didn't shout. I didn't throw things. I didn't need to. The truth itself was sharper than any anger, colder than any punishment I could mete out. I let it sit in the room, filling the air with undeniable justice. In the weeks that followed, the legal case concluded. Compensation, apologies, public acknowledgement of their neglect. They had lost everything they had thought defined them: respect, control, and the illusion of family perfection. But the real victory was mine. I had claimed the life that was mine by right. I had found the family who truly belonged to me, who cherished me, who never questioned my worth. For the first time in my life, I ate until I was full, and it wasn't just food. It was warmth, it was love. It was dignity. It was peace. Elena, she had to face a new reality. She had to understand that life wasn't guaranteed, that privileges once taken for granted could vanish. She had to live in a world where I existed on my terms, not hers. And I watched quietly, feeling a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. She had been my golden shadow for so long. Now she was just a girl, like any other, learning to live without the crown she had always worn. People say revenge is loud, violent, spectacular, but the sweetest revenge is silent, deliberate, and deeply personal. It is the act of taking what was stolen and living fully, unapologetically, without the fear and neglect that once defined you. I left that house for the last time, my heart steady, my steps certain. The hunger that had once consumed me was gone. In its place was power, self-respect, and the knowledge that I had survived the unimaginable. And when I sat at the table with my real family, sharing a meal that was mine in every sense of the word, I finally understood what it meant to be seen. To be loved, to be home. For years, I had waited, invisible and silent, and now at last, I was not only visible, I was victorious,